Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. So in this video we're going to be seeing the cutting and stitching process of the top part of this dress. If you haven't seen the video for the pattern drafting, you should go ahead and check it. So now let's get started. So guys, I've gone ahead to use my pattern to cut out my fabric. You notice that I left 2 inches as seam allowance, 2 inches to the side as seam allowance, and I also left half of an inch to join the darts together. So for my lining, I cut out my lining with a satin fabric, and I cut out my main piece with a duchess fabric. So you can see that I've gone ahead to iron interfacing on it, and I also cut my wadding. So for my back, for my yoke, I used a skin tune net to cut it, and I cut 2 of this. That means I cut it double. One is going to serve as the lining. And for my back piece, I went ahead to tape the 2 sides together. You know, I cut it open. I taped it together because I don't want that to show on my back. So I also left allowances around it, 2 inches at the side. Even for my back yoke, I also cut it out double with the skin tune net, and I also left allowance at the shoulder and at the sides. So I'm going to be adding a modesty panel to this dress. So for the width of my modesty panel, I cut out 10 inches width. I used my satin to cut this. So I'm just going for my back. I did not join the dart. I cut it separately. So I did not join the darts together the way I did for the main piece. So I notched the side that I'll be joining together as the dart. I've gone ahead to sew my modesty panel and turned it over to the right side and gave it a good press. The length of my modesty panel is 7 inches, while the length of my lining piece is 8 inches. This simply means that your modesty panel should be 1 inch shorter than shorter than your lining piece. So I'm joining the modesty panel to the left side of my lining. So to my left lining, that's where I'm joining the modesty panel to. So making sure that it's the side I notched as that, I'm going to place my modesty panel. You notice that I left ½ inch at the top and ½ inch at the bottom before placing the modesty panel. So let me show you this. I ironed a very thick interfacing to the modesty panel so that it would not squeeze. So I ironed a very thick interfacing on it. So I'll just sandwich my modesty panel between my darts. Then I'll go ahead and stitch it. So I use this lace fabric to cut out my back, and I also cut out a satin to lining the lace. So I'll just go over to my machine and stitch the lace and the satin together. So I'll also join my other back darts, making sure it's the side I notched. So I'll just join it together. So I've gone ahead to cut out a long piece of 1½ inches wide. So I'll go over to my machine now and just sew it into a long strip. So after doing that, I'm going to go ahead and cut out 2.5 inches. I later changed this to 2 inches though. So I just cut out 2.5 inches. So I'm going to be using this to form the loop for this dress. I'll just arrange it at my center back, and I'll go ahead and hold it down with a stitch. So let me take you guys over to the machine and show you. So you can see that I reduced it by ½ of an inch, so it is 2 inch now. You can go ahead and use the 2.5, it is also fine. So from the top of my back panel, I came down by ½ of an inch. This ½ of an inch is going to serve as allowance to join the lining. Then I placed my loop and I started stitching. So you can see the way I'm stitching it. I'm placing one after the other. Immediately I finish stitching the other one, I will not give any gap. I'll just place the second one. So I continue stitching like this. Then at the bottom too, when I get to the bottom, I also left about half of an inch to join it to the bottom part of the dress. So I did the same for the other back piece. And you can see, placing them together, you can see that they are equal. So I'll just keep this aside and work on my lining. So I want my lining to I want to add my boning to my lining instead of my main fabric. So I've gone ahead to prep my boning. You can see that I used my paper cello tape to tape it so that it will not to tape the sharp edge, I mean. So I'm just going to place it on my lining and sew. You can see that I placed the boning half inch before from the top, and I left half inch too at the bottom before placing my boning. So I'm just going to stitch my boning to my lining like that. You can go ahead and make a channel for this, but since it's the lining, I didn't see any need to make a channel. I just placed the boning on top of it and I just sewed it down. So I'm going to just do this for the lining piece. Sew my boning on it. So you've noticed that I made another line with my chalk about 3 inches from my dart line. So I'm going to also place a boning on that line. So I just marked a line 3 inches away from my dart line. Then I placed my boning and sewed it down. So right now I placed my back yoke on my back piece and I'm stitching it down. So of course, after I have sewed my back yoke, turned it over to the right side, then I'm just placing it on my back piece and stitching it down. So after stitching down my yoke, I'm just going to place my lining on it and stitch it down. So you can see the reason we left half of an inch before placing our boning in the first place. Because this half of an inch now is serving as allowance to stitch our lining and our fabric together. So I'm going to repeat the process for the other back piece. Placing the lining front side facing the front side of the main back piece, then stitching it at the top. So after doing this, I'm going to go ahead and trim out the excess allowance. Then I'm going to top stitch on the lining side. So I'll just shift all my rough edges towards the lining and stitch it down. I'm also going to repeat the process for the other back piece. So at my center back, I'm going to be adding another boning. So I just placed this boning at my center back and I'm going to stitch it down just the way I'm doing like this. This boning is very important. It's going to add structure to your center back. So I'm just going to stitch it down like that. Then I'm going to go over and close my side. So let me just go ahead and flip this over to the right side. So you can see how it's looking. You can see that the center back is firm, so you can, when you are dragging your rope, you are rest assured. So you can see how it is looking. See the way the back is looking. So I'll just go ahead and repeat the same process to my other back piece, joining my boning to the center back, joining the sides and flipping it over to the right side. Okay, after stitching and turning it over to the right side, you can see the way our back is looking. So let me just arrange it for you guys so that you guys will get the picture of the back. So the only thing left for us the only thing left for this back is to add the button and the rope. So now that we're done with the back, let's start stitching our front. So guys, for my front panel, I've already gone ahead to stitch it because before I noticed my camera wasn't recording, so I had to lose one side. So this is the lining piece. I'm just going to place the center and the sides together like that and stitch it. So I'm going to stitch it by 1/2 of an inch because 1/2 inch is the allowance I left. So I'm just going to stitch it till the end. So I'm going to go ahead and notch it at the underbust so you can see the way my lining is looking. So for my main piece, I've gone ahead to join one side. To join the other side, I'll go ahead and place the underbust of the center and the sides together, making sure the underbust is equal. Then I'll go ahead and start stitching it from the bottom. So I'll just stitch it from the bottom all the way. So when I get to the underbust, I'll pin my needle and I will just continue stitching till I get to the top. So after stitching it to the top, I'll go ahead and notch my underbust, and you can see the way it is looking. You can see the way our cup is looking. So I'll just take this over to my ironing board and give it a very good press. So I used my tailor's arm to iron my bust cup very well, and you can see how it is looking neat and beautiful. So we're going to work on our front yoke. So for our front yoke, I'm going to take this over to my sewing machine and stitch the neckline. You know, we cut this double, we cut it into two. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch it at the neckline, then I'll come back and show you. So after stitching it, I went ahead to trim out the allowance, and I also went ahead to hold it down with a stitch. So I'm going to be joining my yoke to my bustier now, and you know that this sewing a yoke to a sweetheart, deep sweetheart or deep V, is a very tricky process. So I'm just going to start by pinning the yoke down to pinning the yoke to the bustier. So one trick I use on sewing a deep V or a deep sweetheart, I notch the center point, that's that V point, that center point, but I just give it a tiny notch, not up to 1/2 of an inch, maybe 1/4 of an inch. Then it's easier to sew that way. When you notch it, it is way easier to sew. So I suggest that when you want to sew yours, after pinning one side, you just go ahead and sew one side first of all before pinning the second side and sewing it. But like, I just wanted to show you guys how it looks, that's why I'm just pinning everything down. But if you want to sew yours, just sew it one side at a time. So after pinning one side, you sew then you come back and sew the other side. It's going to be way easier for you like that. So after pinning everything down, this is how it looks. You can see that our V point is sharp because of that notch that we gave. So I'll just go over and sew this and show you how it looks. So after stitching it down, see the way it looks. You can see that the neckline is sitting very pretty. You can see that our V is very sharp because of that notch we gave. That notch is very important. So I'm just going to set this aside and work on the lining piece. I've gone ahead to iron my lining and you can see how it is looking. So right now we're going to be adding our boning to the lining piece. I'm doing it the same way I did for the front and for the back. I mean, I'm just going to stitch it directly on my lining piece like that. So I'll just go ahead and use my paper sellotape to cover the rough edges of the boning, or the sharp edges rather of the boning, the same way I did for the back. So this is to prevent it from piercing through your fabric and causing discomfort to you or your clients. If you don't have a paper sellotape, you can use your lighter to just burn down the sharp edges. Or yeah. So after doing this, I'm going to go ahead and place it, arrange it accordingly on my lining, stitch it down, then I'll come back and show you. So I've gone ahead to sew down my boning. I also went ahead to iron it and you can see the way it's looking. So now I'm going to go ahead and join my lining to my main piece. So I'm going to start by pinning it down to one side of the bustier. You can see the way I placed it, so I'm just pinning it down. And also notch the lining the same way you notched the main piece. That V point, just give it a little notch. So after pinning one side, I'm going to go ahead and stitch one side down first. So I'm done stitching one side down. I'll just go ahead and notch it around. So let me flip it over to the right side so that you see the way it looks. You can see that we have successfully lined one part of the bustier. So now we'll go ahead and line the other side. So it is easier to do this one side at a time, because if you say you want to go and do all the sides together, it's going to be difficult. So after pinning it down, I'll go ahead and stitch it. So I'll just go ahead and trim out my wording so that it will be less bulky at that point. Then I'll go ahead and give it tiny notches around. So turning it to the right side, you can see that we have successfully lined our bustier. So now we're going to go over and top stitch on the lining. So after top stitching, this is what we have. I don't know if you can see it clearly. So I'll go ahead and iron this. After ironing it, I will close the side. So after closing the sides and ironing it, you can see the way it is looking. You can see how pretty it is looking. See the way the back is looking. So I also went ahead to stitch down the lining and the fabric together at the bottom side. So now we're going to be joining the back and the front together. So you just take your measurements and just join it together, one side, and then join the other side. So after that, you go ahead and join your shoulder. Of course, you can join your shoulder first before joining your sides. That is fine. Then I'll do this and I'll come back and show you. So after joining the shoulder, I went ahead and trimmed the allowance. So after joining the sides and the shoulder, see the way it is looking, see the way the inside is looking very neat, and look at the modesty panel at the back. So the only thing left is to join this to the bottom part of the dress and add a button at the neckline there, and also make a rope for the back and add your small design and all that. So this is the end of this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to show you the finished look of this dress. See the way our dress is looking really pretty. My client was in love with the dress. So I made a video for the bottom part of the dress, but I lost almost all the clips, so I wasn't able to post it. So if you guys want to see how I achieved it, just leave a comment and I'll try to explain. So if this video has been helpful in any way, don't forget to like, share, and please subscribe to the channel. Thank you. See you in my next video.